All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Welcome. Today we're tackling a topic that is so incredibly common, just so everyday, that we almost never stop to think about where it actually came from. Yep, we're talking about beer. So, if you were to crack open pretty much any standard history textbook, you'd read a very familiar story, right? Ancient humans settled down, they invented agriculture to grow grain, baked bread to survive, and eventually built civilization as we know it. But today, we're exploring a radically different and honestly highly controversial scientific theory that completely flips that script. We're looking at the evidence that early humans didn't settle down to bake bread. They actually settled down to brew beer.
To really wrap our heads around why beer has been so central to human history, we've got to go way, way back. Tens of millions of years back, actually. See, long before humans were farming, our primate ancestors were forging a deep evolutionary relationship with alcohol. And this sets the stage for absolutely everything that follows.
So, University of California, Berkeley researcher Robert Dudley proposed what he calls the drunken monkey hypothesis. Picture this, in dense tropical rainforests, calories were incredibly scarce. But ethanol, which naturally occurs when yeasts ferment the sugars in overripe fruit, is a super light molecule. It gets picked up and carried rapidly by the wind. Primates who evolved a really strong sense of smell to track down that ethanol were led directly to highly nutritious, calorie-dense fruit. What this means is that our behavioral attraction to low concentrations of alcohol isn't some modern vice. It's actually a genetically based survival trait dating back millions of years. It literally kept our ancestors alive.
We're jumping to 13,000 years ago in what is today Israel. There was a semi-sedentary group called the Natufians, and they're the vital link between nomadic hunter-gatherers and the earliest farmers. Now, in a burial site called Rakefet Cave, researchers from Stanford University led by archaeologist Li Liu made just a stunning discovery. Deep inside 13,000-year-old stone mortars, they found starch residues and these microscopic plant particles called phytoliths. Guys, this is the earliest known record of man-made alcohol anywhere in the world. And the crazy part, it predates any evidence of bread making.
These ancient folks were incredibly advanced. They developed this brilliant three-step process. Step 1, malting. They germinated grains in water, then drained and dried them. Step 2, mashing. They mixed that malt with water and heated it for up to 4 hours. And Step 3, fermenting, where they just let wild yeast do its magic over several days. The Stanford researchers actually recreated this exact process in a lab to confirm it. The fact that hunter-gatherers were executing this deliberate, complex chemistry 13,000 years ago, absolutely mind-blowing. They relied on 7 different plant families, including wheat, oats, and flax. It had a very low alcohol content. It definitely wasn't clear, and it for sure wasn't carbonated. You've got to imagine drinking something that looked and tasted a lot more like a murky, thin porridge or sour oatmeal than a modern pint. It was fundamentally a food, just enhanced by our ancient friend, fermentation. They carved these massive, 20-foot-tall, T-shaped pillars that weighed up to 50 metric tons. Think about that. How do you mobilize hundreds of nomadic hunter-gatherers to just halt their daily survival routines and haul megaliths? Well, the answer seems to be epic communal feasts fueled by massive limestone vats. The absolutely crucial point here is the sheer scale of the operation. Researchers found 6 of these barrel and trough-like limestone vessels integrated directly into the rooms at Göbekli Tepe. And their capacity? Up to 160 liters. That's enough to fill a standard bathtub. We're talking about an enormous amount of liquid meant for collective consumption, essentially acting as the ultimate social glue for these massive ancient building projects.
Archaeologists cataloged an astonishing 10,000 grinding stones at the site. 10,000! This proved beyond a doubt that wild grains were being processed on a totally industrial scale to feed these congregations. They were turning those wild cereals into porridges, stews, and, crucially, fermented beverages.
Now, you might be wondering, how do we actually know they were making beer in those 160-liter vats? Well, chemical analysis revealed grayish-black residues of a substance called oxalate sticking to the lower parts of the vessels. Oxalate is a chemical byproduct that develops during the steeping, mashing, and fermenting of cereals. Paired with thousands of animal bones scattered all around the site, this paints a super vivid picture of ecstatic ritualistic feasts fueled by wild game and literal vats of early beer.
The traditional model argues that humans farmed to eat bread, which then led to civilization. But the beer theory, which was actually proposed back in the 1950s, completely flips this. It argues that the desire for the nutritional, intoxicating, and social benefits of beer was the real catalyst. That desire drove humans to undergo the incredibly hard, backbreaking work of domesticating grain.
Think about how much effort goes into farming. It turns out the ultimate reward might have just been a prehistoric pint.
In fact, if we look at the earliest recorded recipe for beer, the ancient Sumerian hymn to Ninkasi, the goddess of brewing, we find a startling piece of evidence. The recipe describes making beer from a very specific type of bread. But here's the catch. This bread wasn't made to be eaten daily. It was baked extra hard specifically for a long shelf life, so it wouldn't spoil. As researchers from the University of Chicago and the Alaska Science Forum point out, baking bread was essentially just a convenient way to store the raw materials you needed for making beer.
Because when you look at it practically, prehistoric beer was basically a superfood. The fermentation process lowers the pH and reduces oxygen, making beer much less perishable than raw grain or bread. Plus, the yeast actually breaks down toxic and indigestible substances in raw barley, while drastically increasing essential B vitamins and amino acids. And perhaps most importantly, the boiling and fermenting process provided a reliable, pathogen-free source of hydration. For our ancestors, this wasn't just a party drink, it was a fundamental survival tool.
See, this profound reliance on beer didn't just stop in the ancient world. It crossed the Atlantic. In a historical account written by pilgrims Edward Winslow and William Bradford, they document the exact reason the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock rather than continuing south. They were running out of provisions, and they noted their main concern was, quote, especially our beer.
To the early colonists, beer was viewed exactly as it was by the ancient Natufians and Sumerians, as liquid bread. This wasn't some evening luxury. Instead, everyone, sailors, farmers, literally children, relied on beer for daily, safe hydration. It provided essential carbohydrates and minerals. Colonists specifically planted barley alongside their food crops, just to ensure they could brew this life-sustaining staple.
Did humanity build civilization just to get a good buzz? As we've seen today, from the drunken monkey hypothesis in the jungle, to the massive 160-liter vats of Gably Tepe, all the way to the pilgrims desperately rationing their barrels at Plymouth Rock, our evolutionary thirst is undeniable. Beer provided the calories, the safe water, the vitamins, and the social glue required to build monumental societies.